They dared me to mock him like I do in private, but I went too far and he left me alone. Hi Reddit, my name is May. I am 28 years old. My husband's name is Richard, and he is 30 years old. I met Richard on an ordinary day that didn't carry any special meaning at the time. It was 5 years ago, and I was working part-time at a bookstore while trying to figure out what I wanted from life. He came in looking for a book on personal finance, one of those older editions with a plain cover and yellowed pages. He seemed unsure of the layout, and I offered to help him. He thanked me with a smile that felt soft and genuine, the kind you don't come across very often. Richard didn't speak much during that first interaction. He was very calm, and that about him felt unusual, especially compared to the kind of people I was used to. There was something steady in his posture, like he didn't mind being overlooked by people. A few days later, he came back to the store. But that time, he looked for a novel I had mentioned during our first conversation. We talked a little more, and I found myself curious about him. He wasn't the kind of man I usually noticed. There was no flair or charm in the way he dressed or spoke, but something about him lingered. We started seeing each other slowly. He wasn't pushy or overly eager. I liked that at first. It gave me room to breathe. Richard worked in a small accounting firm, and his income was steady but not much. He lived simple, managed his bills, and never seemed bothered by what others had. He would take me to quiet places, often walking instead of driving, saying he enjoyed taking his time. I didn't mind then. I told myself I liked the simplicity. After a year, we got married. It wasn't a grand celebration. There was no lavish ceremony or elaborate preparation, just a small gathering with a few friends and family members, and then we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment he had been renting for years. He didn't own a car, so we relied on public transport. He offered stability and warmth, and for a while I believed that was enough. In the early months of our marriage, I tried to adjust to his world. Richard was thoughtful, always making sure I had what I needed, even if it meant giving up something for himself. He didn't earn much, but he planned carefully. We never went hungry, and the bills were always paid. But the more time passed, the more I started to notice the gap between my expectations and what our life actually was. My friends began to comment on it too, though not always directly. They would ask if Richard had finally gotten a raise or if we had plans to move somewhere nicer. At first, I laughed it off. I told them we were comfortable, but deep down, I wanted more. I wanted the kind of life I saw on social media, the kind my friends seemed to have. Dinners at expensive places, trips with stylish photos, gifts that came in little boxes with ribbons. Richard never did any of that. He said he showed love through actions, not purchases, but actions didn't shine on a screen. As the months turned into a couple of years, I found myself getting more frustrated. Richard didn't change. He still came home tired, still wore the same few shirts, still talked about saving rather than spending. I began to speak to my friends about it more openly. At first, I said things half in jest. I told them he was sweet but boring, responsible but dull. They laughed, and I laughed too, but inside something was growing cold. I started pointing out little things at home. I told him his shirts looked worn out, that our apartment felt cramped, that I wished he would do something spontaneous for once. He always listened, said he would try, but nothing really changed. He was who he had always been. My dissatisfaction didn't make him wealthier or more stylish or more assertive. It just made him quiet. By the 3rd year of our marriage, I had started mocking him more openly. At home, I would say things with hurtful words that I hadn't used before. I told him he wasn't ambitious enough, that other men did more for their wives. He didn't fight back or argue. He would look down or walk away, and sometimes that annoyed me more than if he had raised his voice. I wanted something loud, something that showed he was affected, but Richard didn't shout, he just absorbed it. My friends noticed too. When they visited, I would make comments about his job or how long he took to finish basic repairs. They would be shocked, but I cared less and acted it was harmless. Of course it was for me. Richard would just sit there, giving a weak smile or saying nothing at all. I started calling it quiet embarrassment. I think he felt it, but he never said anything about it. Somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing the man I married. I began to see him only as a weight I carried. He didn't rise to meet the version of life I thought I deserved. Instead, he remained exactly who he was. Careful, gentle, consistent. I began to resent those traits. I wanted to be swept up in something grand. Instead, I was held gently, and gently wasn't good enough anymore. Looking back, I think the change in me happened slowly. It wasn't a single moment. It was built across many days of comparison, of wishing, of listening to voices outside our home. I didn't feel proud of my life, and instead of owning that feeling, I placed it all on Richard. I told myself I deserved better, that I was wasting my youth on someone who wouldn't grow. And so I kept talking, kept mocking, and kept pointing fingers. I had no idea I was slowly pushing him toward a decision I wouldn't be ready for. I didn't know the exact moment when Richard began to pull away from me. Maybe it was when I started comparing him to other men out loud, not minding if he would hear those words. Maybe it was when I gave importance to my friends' voices to have more effect on me than his. They often told me I was too pretty to be stuck in a life like mine, that I could do better if I just stopped settling. At first, I brushed it off as teasing. Later, it became valid. Every complaint I had about Richard was met with support. They would say they understood that a woman like me deserved more. I let that idea grow in me. I began to act like a different person around them. I always laughed loudly, exaggerated my complaints, and gave them the version of our life that fit the story they already believed. The quiet, boring husband, the underwhelming intimacy, the outdated clothes, the absence of romantic gestures. I painted a picture that pushed them to say the things I had already started thinking. They told me I should find someone who could give me the life I wanted, a man who would show me off, spoil me, satisfy me. They told me to stop wasting my time. Eventually, I listened, not all at once and not with some big declaration, but piece by piece. I started spending more time away from home. I dressed differently, went out more, stayed out late. I justified everything by telling myself Richard wouldn't notice, that he wouldn't care. I told myself I deserved to feel desired again, to feel special. When the messages from someone new started coming, I didn't resist for long. He was flashy, bold, and handsome, the opposite of Richard. He made me feel like the woman I thought I had lost. I didn't love him, I knew that much, but I loved how I felt when I was with him. He didn't ask questions or talk about bills or plans. He just made me feel wanted. When I was with him, I could forget the simple life I had back home. My friends encouraged it. They said I was finally doing something for myself, that it was about time. I stopped hiding it from them. I told them everything, every detail, and they cheered me on. I felt seen, even though none of it felt real. Eventually, we started dating. His name is Steve. Steve and I dated for 2 years. Yes, guys, 2 whole years, and it felt really good. Like I said earlier, it felt good anytime I was with him. Sometimes I wished for us to just elope to somewhere far away and tie the knot together. But each time I remembered Richard, I couldn't not because I loved him, but because I didn't want to dissolve our marriage. At least not at that time. I wanted to know if whatever Steve and I had was genuine and real. At least it was from my own side. I just wanted to be sure if Steve and I were on the same page before thinking about it. I started keeping late nights, and Richard never asked where I was going or why I always came back home late. He never checked my phone. He still came home with small things he thought I'd like. A flower from the corner shop. A dessert from the bakery near his office. I barely looked at them. I told myself he was trying too late, that it was no longer enough. He still smiled at me in the mornings, still asked how my day was, but I answered with cold, short replies. I didn't want his kindness anymore at that time. I had already decided that I deserved more. So guys, one day, one of my friends suggested we organize a couples hangout. Something casual, just to break the routine. She said we could turn it into a game night. I agreed, and so did the rest of my friends. It sounded like fun, and part of me wanted to show off how much I had changed. I told Richard about the couples hangout, even though I didn't expect him to say yes, but he did. He said it would be nice to hang out with my friends and their partners. He also said he looked forward to having a great time with them. I didn't correct him. I didn't say I rarely spoke of him in kind ways. The couples hangout was the first among us, and so we thought to make that day really special. We didn't do much preparation, though, just a couple of drinks and snacks to munch on. We also planned out a few activities like games to make it lively. At that time, I couldn't wait for that day to come. I didn't know why, but I felt really excited about the hangout. But I never thought that hangout was finally going to tear Richard and I apart for good. Yes, I always put Richard down at every given opportunity I had. But that doesn't mean that I wanted a divorce or wanted us to drift apart. Also, I never expected Richard to be the one that would quit the marriage. But after everything that happened, I regretted making Richard feel less of himself. The night arrived, and the apartment we gathered in was loud with conversation. Everyone was catching up with each other. There were also drinks, snacks, music in the background to chill, which made it a fun night from the beginning. Everyone brought someone along. My friends' partners dressed really well, and I felt really ashamed of Richard's dressing. Richard wore his usual clothes, the same shirt I had told him looked worn out weeks before. There wasn't anything I could do at that moment. I tried stopping him from putting that on, but he didn't see any fault in the shirt. While others were looking smart and neatly dressed, Steve was just there. He greeted everyone with a smile, sat beside me, and tried to join the conversations when he could. The night started well from the beginning. Halfway through the night, the game started. Someone suggested truth or dare, and I rolled my eyes, pretending to be annoyed while secretly enjoying the attention. The dares were harmless at first, silly tasks, little jokes. Then one of my friends turned to me and smirked. She dared me to do what I always did behind closed doors. She told me to mock Richard the way I did when it was just us girls. Everyone laughed. Even I laughed at first. But then I started talking. I made a joke about how he still used the same phone from 3 years ago. I mocked his job title, called him an accountant like it was an insult. I said he never knew how to plan a decent date, how we had never been on a real vacation. The laughter got louder, so I kept going. I said the intimacy was disappointing, that I often had to pretend. I said he didn't know how to dress, how to speak up, how to impress anyone. I kept talking, not realizing how far I was going. My friends were in tears from laughter, and for a moment I felt like I had won something. Then I looked at Richard. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't angry either. He just looked at me, as if trying to recognize the woman in front of him. He didn't say a word. He stood up quietly, thanked the host for the evening, and left. No dramatic exit, no raised voice, just silence. The room got quiet after he closed the door. No one said anything for a few seconds. Someone tried to joke again, but the mood had shifted. I felt it settle over me like a heavy cloth. I didn't follow him. I didn't call. I sat there pretending I didn't care, but inside I was frozen. Something had shifted, and I didn't know how to fix it. I returned home later that night expecting him to be asleep or watching something in the living room, like he usually does any time I came back home late. But the house was empty. His shoes were not even in the hallway like it used to be. The keys he usually hung by the door weren't there. At first, I thought maybe he had gone to clear his head. I waited. I checked my phone, expecting a message. Nothing came. Hours passed, and I began to think about what had happened earlier that day. I had humiliated him in front of strangers, laughed at him like he was less than a man. I didn't think it would matter so much. For a long time, I had convinced myself that he didn't feel things deeply, that he was numb to my words. But now I realized I had never given him enough credit. I had spent years overlooking his small efforts, forgetting the quiet ways he showed he cared. It was easier to focus on what he lacked, easier to build a story where I was the victim of a stagnant marriage. That night, I saw the consequences unfold in silence. He didn't come home the next morning either. I called his phone and it rang, but he didn't answer any of my calls. I texted him once, asking where he was. No reply. I was at home thinking about everything, and I felt guilty about what I did. I spent the entire day trying to figure out what to say next. Apologies felt too late. Explanations felt hollow. For the first time in a long while, I realized I had pushed someone too far, and this time there would be no soft landing. So guys, it was 4 days before Richard returned back home. It was in the night, but not so late though. When I heard the door open, Elle knew he was the one because we both were the only ones that had a spare key to the house, and we could open at any time without disturbing the other to open the door when coming back home late. He walked in with a small bag and was calm. I knew Richard to be a calm person, but the way he was calm when he walked in was unlike him. He didn't look angry. He looked settled, like someone who had already made a decision and wasn't looking for a discussion. He moved through the house like a guest, picking up a few more of his things, checking drawers and shelves. I sat on the couch and was confused whether to speak. When he walked past me, he paused and said he would send me the papers. Then he left again. That was when it hit me. He wasn't just angry or hurt, he was done. I couldn't even talk to him or apologize for how I made him feel. I wanted to say something, but I wasn't given a chance. I called out to him and opened my mouth to say that I was sorry, but guess what, guys? Richard slammed the door right in my face without looking back. I was hurt, angry, and mad at myself for putting my husband so low. A few days later, the divorce process started. I received a letter through a courier. Inside was a notice of separation. He had hired a lawyer and was filing for a divorce. Alongside it was a typed list of items he would be taking, dates and times when he would return to collect them, and a short note that said he had already signed the first set of documents. I stared at the envelope, still half expecting to wake up from a dream. My friends who had once encouraged me to rebel started to ignore me. They didn't laugh easily like they used to when I told them what was happening. Some of them stopped answering my calls or even checking up on me. Maybe they were embarrassed by how far things had gone, or maybe they didn't want to be tied to the fallout. One of them messaged me to say she never thought Richard would leave, that I had always said he was too weak to walk away. I didn't reply. Of course, there was no need to respond to such a message. It wasn't like she was sympathizing with me. So guys, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had said over the years. The jokes, the complaints, the ridicule. I thought about the way he looked at me before he left, like he didn't know who I was anymore. I tried to tell myself that I didn't mean to hurt him, that I was only trying to keep up with my friends, to protect my pride. But the truth was that I had been cruel, and I had done it so casually that it didn't even feel wrong until I watched him walk away. The house was quiet, and I felt really lonely. He returned once in a while to take some furniture, another time to collect his clothes and books. Each time Richard stopped by, he never said a word. He didn't ask for explanations or show that he was still angry. That quietness became the loudest thing in the room. It was different from the silence I used to give him. Mine had been full of bitterness, meant to punish him. But his silence wasn't trying to teach me anything. It showed that he didn't care. I tried to imagine what he must have told his family, his friends, if he told them the truth or let them guess. I wondered if he blamed me completely or if he took any of the blame himself. But I knew that the majority of everything that happened was all my fault. I had allowed the distance between us to grow. I had fed it with disrespect, betrayal, and mockery. And he had simply decided not to stay where he wasn't wanted. People say divorce comes slowly, but sometimes it comes all at once, in a moment when a person realizes they've been made a fool in front of others, when they see their worth reduced to a joke. For Richard, that moment was in that living room, surrounded by people who laughed as his wife tore him apart. That was the night I lost him, not because he raised his voice or stormed out, but because he saw no reason to stay. There were no more gifts left on the table, no good morning greetings, no soft gestures waiting at the door. The little things I used to brush off were gone. The emptiness in the house reminded me of them every single day. I tried to distract myself. I tried to go out more, to keep my old routines, but even the thrill of rebellion felt hollow now. The man I had used to fill the gaps, Steve, didn't return my calls either. He had lost interest the moment my marriage ended. I had traded stability for something that couldn't last beyond the moment. I wasn't used to feeling remorse. I had spent so long in control of the story that I forgot what it meant to be the one left behind. Now I know. And there was no undoing what had already been said and done. I didn't tell my family everything. I said we had grown apart. I said it had been mutual. I said the decision was calm and respectful. None of that was true. But I couldn't bring myself to admit the real reason. I couldn't find the courage to say that I had ruined it by mocking him, by pushing him away, by making him feel like he didn't matter. I didn't want the shame that came with the truth, so I let them believe what was easier to hear. But silence didn't protect me from consequences. Richard moved on faster than I expected, not in a loud or showy way, but quietly, like someone who had already mourned the relationship long before it ended. A few months after the separation, I heard from someone that he had changed jobs. Apparently, he had found something more stable. the kind of job I used to say he'd never get. He started dressing better, looked healthier, and more focused. I came across a photo of him once, shared by a mutual friend of ours. He was smiling, standing beside someone I didn't recognize. There was a light in his face that I hadn't seen in years. It looked like peace. That photo stayed with me. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I missed him in a romantic way, but because I finally saw what he might have looked like if I had been kinder. I wondered what it would have been like if I had supported him, encouraged him, lifted him up instead of tearing him down. Maybe we wouldn't have lasted forever, but it might not have ended like this. Maybe he would have looked at me with that same light in his eyes, instead of the blank, resigned expression he gave me on his last day in the house. I didn't try to reach out. There was nothing left to say. No apology could fix what I broke. He didn't owe me a conversation. So I accepted the consequences of my own actions. My friends moved on too. The ones who used to fill my weekends with laughter and parties slowly drifted away. One got engaged, another relocated. The group chats that once buzzed with gossip and exciting plans for girls' hangout became quiet. Without them, I had more time to think about myself and the way forward. I started seeing a therapist. At first, I only went to find something to do. I thought maybe it would help me feel better, but instead, it reminded me of the things I had ignored for years. I talked about the pressure I felt to keep up appearances, the way I used humor to cover resentment, the way I let the judgment of others shape my marriage. I talked about Richard, about how he wasn't perfect, but how I never really saw him for who he was. I realized that for a long time, I wasn't trying to build a partnership. I was trying to build an image. And when he didn't fit into it, I tore him apart instead of adjusting my expectations. The therapist didn't tell me things to justify what I did, or was remorseful about everything that I had told her. There was also no advice on how to get him back. Only a slow process of making me understand why I became the person I did. I didn't like all the things I said. I didn't like the fact that I was the mastermind behind my downfall. Some nights were hard for me. Sometimes I'd find myself remembering small things, the way he used to wait for me to get home before eating dinner, how he never forgot my favorite drink, how he always fixed things around the house without being asked. I had dismissed those things before, told myself they didn't matter compared to money or looks. Now, they felt enormous. They felt like signs of someone who cared in ways I had taken for granted. I didn't date anyone for a while, not because I didn't have chances, but because I didn't trust myself. I wasn't sure if I was ready to be in another relationship without repeating the same mistakes. I needed to rebuild from the inside out, and that wasn't something I could do with someone new in the picture. So I stayed single. I worked on myself, reflected back to where I wasn't appreciative enough, and I tried to change. So guys, 3 weeks after Richard moved out of the house, I also moved out. The rent was due, and I couldn't keep up with it. I had no job that could earn me money to keep up with the rent. I know you all would call me names for putting Richard through a hard time and mocking his job, whereas I have none. Guys, any word more than wicked and heartless should be the right one to quantify my behavior. I terribly regretted it anyway. I didn't have a job then. I was pushing Richard to go for bigger jobs, not to better him, but for my own selfish desires. I wanted to live the kind of life my friends were living. I forgot that I also need to work for it if I need it that bad. Sometimes people ask me why my marriage ended. I give them the same answers that Richard and I grew apart, and that things changed. But inside, I know better. I know that I mocked a good man until he couldn't take it anymore. I know that I made choices that ruined our relationship. And I know that when the final moment came, when he dared to endure public humiliation and chose instead to walk away, he was choosing dignity over disrespect. Richard may never speak to me again. He may never know how much I've changed or how much I regret. And that's okay. His forgiveness isn't owed to me. And every time I think of him, I don't see the man I once mocked. I see the man I should have respected. On the day of the divorce, there was no shouting, no threats. He had already detached long before he handed me the divorce papers. He didn't look bitter when we sat opposite each other. Richard was calm, like someone who had accepted what needed to happen. I read through the documents for a few minutes and discovered that the terms weren't fair. which didn't sit well with me. Richard was asking for more than what was reasonable. He asked that I should compensate for emotional damage for humiliating him both in private and public. The amount he had stated was outrageous. I asked him where he expected me to get that kind of money from. With a calm voice, Richard told me that wasn't any of his business. We hadn't built much together financially, and I had more than him by then. That was all thanks to Steve. When Steve and I were dating, he gave me lots of money and bought me expensive things. Right there, I will say that I was finished. The only way out for me was to sell off my belongings. Richard also knew that I was cheating on him with a guy, but didn't say anything. He kept up with my excesses and waited for the right time to deal with me. Even when I had humiliated him in public, he didn't react immediately or question me. His silence and actions says it all. Even at that moment with the lawyer, I didn't know what to do about Richard's demands. I asked the lawyer for a solution to what Richard was asking, and the lawyer told me that I had to meet up with the demands at all costs. In anger, I stormed out of the office. The demands were ridiculous and outrageous for me. I refused to sign the divorce papers or agreed to the terms. I went back home bragging that Richard could not do anything. But guess what, guys? I was mistaken. The next day, Richard stormed into the little space I was managing with two strange guys to pick up my belongings. I honestly didn't know how he was able to find me. They selected my most expensive outfits and accessories. I tried stopping them, but they didn't listen. I cried and begged Richard to please not take those things because they were the only things I could account for. Richard, as usual, didn't say a word or listen to everything I said and left. I felt devastated and I cried my eyes out. Everything I had was taken away from me, including my credit cards. In that moment of anger, I signed the divorce papers and sent it to him later that day. I was done trying to make up things for us to get back to, but it yielded no result. I felt defeated. I hated myself for allowing Richard to get away with everything I managed to get from Steve. I didn't know how I would get back on my feet, most especially when Steve had broken up with me. Telling my family was very hard. They were shocked and at the same time disappointed. They wanted details of what actually happened, but I didn't give. I kept repeating the same phrases I had practiced. I didn't tell them I had pushed him to that point. I didn't tell them about the truth or dare game, the things I said in front of everyone. I didn't tell them how I used to mock him behind closed doors for years. I just said it didn't work out. Life fell apart immediately after the divorce. Even till now, my life is not as it used to be. The independence I craved for that made me do all of those things became sour. I realized that I didn't want freedom as much as I wanted appreciation. I had destroyed someone who appreciated me in ways I never noticed until he was gone. Update. Hello, Redditors. It's been nearly a year since the divorce. I'm here to give you guys the final update after the divorce. I know I haven't been in this space for a long time now. The truth is, I wanted to work on myself to be a better person. A lot has changed, and not all of it is visible. I have worked on myself, and I can say for sure that there's a little improvement. I am not who I used to be 2 years ago. I've started volunteering on weekends. Nothing extraordinary, just time spent helping with community programs. I needed to reconnect with something real, something not about status or appearance. It has helped me understand people better. And more than anything, it has helped me understand myself. I ran into someone recently who knew both Richard and I. It was one of our neighbors at our former apartment. She felt pity for me considering how unkempt I was looking. She didn't bring up the past, most especially the divorce. She just smiled and said I looked different and asked how life had been for me. Even if I had been honest with her, there wasn't much she could do for me. Life had been hard, but then I kept pushing. I told her that my life had been good. Of course it was a lie. That was the only thing I could think of that was best to reply, so as to avoid any other questions that would trigger my emotions at that moment. I honestly regretted everything that happened, but then again, there's nothing much that I could do. I can't turn back the hands of time to make up for my silly mistakes. Like the saying goes, it's too late to cry over spilt milk. As for love, I haven't rushed into anything. I've had conversations, met new people, but I'm more intentional now. I'm not looking for someone to validate me. I'm looking for someone I can respect and grow with, someone I won't try to change or diminish to fit a version of success that doesn't matter anymore. I really want to improve myself until I'm sure to be in a relationship with someone. I don't ever want to ever treat any man the way I treated Richard. It was rare, and I'm sure no man would be treated like that. Don't get me wrong, guys. What I meant by his kindness was rare in terms of his calm nature and the way he loved and treated me with so much respect. Before I met Richard, I had never experienced such love. I've made peace with the fact that I may never speak to Richard again. I don't stalk his social media. I don't ask mutual friends for updates. I let him have his space. But I think of him sometimes, and I hope he's doing well. I hope he wakes up each day next to someone who appreciates the little efforts I once ignored. Looking back, I can't erase what happened. I can't rewrite the nights I mocked him or the day I tore him down in front of others. But I can keep choosing to live differently. That's the only apology that matters now. Change, real, lasting change, is the only way to honor what was lost. Some lessons come too late to save a relationship, but they still matter. They still shape who we become. And in the silence that followed losing him, I found the beginning of something new. Not redemption, maybe, but growth. And for now, that's enough. I would continue to work on myself to be a good woman that can build a home and not destroy it. If I find love again, I hope I accept it as it is without quantifying it with material things. But if I don't get to love again, it's okay with me. I have made peace with the fact that I might be single for a long time, most especially if any guy finds out that I am a divorcee. That title was something I never wanted to have. That's why I delayed serving Richard divorce papers when Steve and I were together. It's something I detest so much, but it's now what I'm known as.